Hello and welcome to another edition of Finding Your Frequency. I'm Brian Sexton, and I am joined today by a gentleman who has a great story to tell. All the way from Leavenworth, Kansas, Dr. Ted Davis. Dr. Davis, how are you?
I am well, sir. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, listen, we know, because we had a good conversation not long ago, and we talked about things like leadership and strategic leadership. And it's clear to me that you have a driving passion for all things leadership, and in particular the strategic side of it. Where did that passion come from? What's your definition of strategic leadership? Where are you operating from as you work to help people in this area?
Well, that's quite a bit of to cover. Certainly my passion for leadership and these days leadership development, I think, started even when I was a teenager and I was thrust into leadership positions, perhaps not with a lot of formal education, but certainly the practical exercise. But certainly my 4 years at West Point was a focus on not only the exercise, being a practitioner of leadership, but the study of leadership. And I think both of those are critically important because as a leader, my favorite definition of leadership comes from Kouzes and Posner's book, The Leadership Challenge. And basically it says leadership is the art of energizing and mobilizing others who want to strive for and achieve shared aspirations. And there's just so much in that. Leadership is an art, which means it takes the science of human behavior, which we need to study, but then it takes into the practical application. So the art means that we make decisions, sometimes tough decisions. And it's based on the fact that you've got experience and knowledge, but where's the wisdom to do the right thing at the right time? And just the right tone and so forth. So I think that was the start point, was not only learning how to be a leader at West Point, and then in my Army career, I had the great joy and pleasure of working with a lot of fantastic soldiers. It was a pleasure and honor to be their lieutenant or their captain and their colonel and so forth. But I worked for some superb leaders who taught not so much from the classroom, but taught from everyday practical application and example of leadership. So as I retired from active duty, that passion for developing leaders continued. I was very fortunate that my last 4 years on active duty, I was teaching at the Commander General Staff College here at Fort Leavenworth, and it was a wonderful way to exit the Army and make a final contribution. Was training soldiers, training officers to be strategic thinkers, because that was my specialty. I was managing the Army Strategist Training Program. And I think the definition I gave you about leadership being the art of energizing, mobilizing others applies whether it's tactical or strategic. But at the tactical level, a leader influences most strongly by personal example, by being alongside. But at the strategic level, you're affecting the organization through others. And so that's where the idea of developing strategic leaders became a passion for me. How do you help young men, young women mature and grow in leadership and wisdom? And that's kind of become my driving theme lately, is leadership wisdom.
You know, I've not heard that. I've not heard the word wisdom attached to leadership. Where did that come from? How do you define the wisdom side of it when you're playing around? You're not playing around, but when you're working with a client?
Well, wisdom, and what I'm saying these days as a coach, consultant, and trainer, is that I'm helping leaders find the wisdom to address their challenges. quite often you can study the material, you can do the research in the book. It's about knowledge acquisition, and then you're going to apply it. But I think wisdom takes it a step further. As I've been thinking about this since our last conversation, I think wisdom really gets to the fact that you must understand your why. What is your central purpose? What is the fundamental thing that's driving you? What's the calling of your life, of your organization, of your people, and so forth? What's the why? But then you've got to have a structure of what are the principles? What's the worldview? How do I see the world? How do I see all the pieces fitting together? And what are the guiding principles? Things like integrity, respect, humility, I think. So how do you apply those in any given situation? So the short definition, I think, of wisdom is applying knowledge and experience consistently in any situation. So you've got to understand wherever I am, what's the situation? Who are the people involved? What are the circumstances? What's the long range prospects? You've got to consider everything. And then how do I apply the principle? The principle has got to be the guiding force, the compass. Now, how do I modify my behavior in this situation? I think Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey,
tremendous author.
One of his books, tremendous author. I think it was in his book, Principle-Based Leadership. Talked about you've got to have firm principles, and the reason why we fail is you may have a principle, but we crash against the principle rather than having the principle guide us into the right decision making. What's the right action? And again, how do you choose the right words at the right time? When is it right to be compassionate? When is it right to be confirmed? One of the metaphors I like to use when I'm talking about leadership and training leaders is that we've got to be good skiers, not good snowboarders. You got to be good skiers. And you got to keep those two skis parallel as you're going down the slope. And what you do, obviously, if you've ever skied, is you shift your weight. And that's how you navigate, is you shift weight, but you keep the skis parallel at all times. Because if you cross tips, you're going to tumble and break. And if you split the skis, oh my gosh, does that hurt? So
I haven't skied as much as I've slid. I've slid down the hill after falling on my face more than I've skied.
Absolutely. I've done a little bit of cross-country skiing a long time ago when I was young. But the idea is that you've got to be people-focused and results-oriented simultaneously. You can't separate those two. You must be people-focused. You must be results-oriented. You have to keep them parallel. And so as you make decisions, you got to figure out today, I've got to give a little bit more on the person, on the people. It's time to be compassionate. The next day, it's got to be, no, it's the mission. We got to stay late today. We got to get this thing done. The next day, okay, your kid's going to have a recital. Yes, you can get off earlier, whatever it is. And that's what I think is this idea of wisdom is how do you shift weight? How do I be people-focused and results-oriented at all times? And the other pairing that I like to emphasize that's inseparable, and I think it becomes one skill, is you must be able to communicate effectively and instill trust. And that is one skill set. You can't separate those two because you cannot build trust if you're not communicating effectively. And you can't communicate effectively if you're not instilling trust. Because people don't trust you no matter how well you say it. They have a veil of suspicion over what the message they're receiving. So you've got to be able to do both those things simultaneously.
Dr. Davis, you have a wide and listen, you're talking to somebody where talking isn't a problem, stopping generally is, so it's very easy for me to listen. And especially with what we're talking about, leadership and wisdom. What is an ideal client look like? You obviously have a varied and expansive military background. You've been working through Grace Strategic Services. Who would benefit most from spending time with you?
Well, my ideal client generally is a CEO, the senior executive, whether it's a CEO or somebody in the C-suite, who is trying to go to the next level in their leadership and trying to take the organization to the next level, because my focus is the leader and his or her organization. How do they move that organization forward? So it's got to be somebody who, number one, has at least 100 people or more. That's usually about the size they can afford my services. But they have the size of problems that I think I'm most equipped to be able to coach them on, or to help them do the team building. And so working with the C-suite, it can be working with the CEO himself or herself, but then also working with the leadership team, the strategic leadership team, to ensure that they have the cohesion and the trust to work efficiently and effectively. So I like to work with a company, and particularly if it's going to be leadership or management focused, try to do three things. Number one, clarify what is the mission. Make sure there's a clear statement of the common mission of the organization. Then we get into the organizational culture. And the organizational culture, by definition, the organization is how we think, how we perceive, how we think, and how we feel about everything. What do we perceive, think, and feel about our clients? What do we think or perceive, think, and feel about our brand, about one another as a team? So it's so important that we write and we document. Here is the formal organizational structure, organizational culture that we're trying to develop. Write it down so it can be written, so that it can be shared in the same way time and time again. So as you onboard people, you can sit down and here's our culture, and here's what's written, what it means. And then the companion to that is a leadership model. So I work with, again, the key leaders, the C-suite, to come up with, how does this company define leadership for itself? What are the key action verbs to say, these are the human behaviors we practice to influence and to guide and direct and support our people? And so those two documents, the organizational culture piece and the leadership model, they come together and help guide the leadership as well as people. So we enhance the performance of the organization. One of my favorite principles about coaching and consulting and so forth is really driving home the point that every organization exists to deliver something of value to the marketplace. And so that's, when you hear it, it seems like, oh, of course, it's obvious. But I think if you think about it, every organization exists to deliver something of value to the marketplace. Well, what is that one thing? What's that value? And so, as I mentioned about getting clarity about the mission of the organization, what is the value we are organized to deliver? And then, are we organized correctly to do that? Are we training people? Are we taking care of people? Are we recruiting people? All of our talent management has got to be directed towards, how do we deliver value? So we've got to get the right people on board. We've got to equip them properly. We've got to be able to train them, support them, set clear expectations, observe their performance, give them timely, meaningful feedback. And I think that's what makes a thriving organization successful.
All right, Dr. Davis, you ready for the harsh spotlight of finding your frequency?
Sure.
Because we have three questions that we ask everyone who joins us on the show, so that we can get some feedback for our viewers about you, and in particular, some of the obstacles and ways that you've maneuvered through your life. So the first question is, Give me a defining moment, something in your life that shaped you and helped build you into the man that you are today.
Well, there's a whole host of those. But when you asked, we were talking the other day and you asked me that question, I was kind of surprised that the first thing that came to my mind was my senior year in high school. My parents were separated. They had a pretty turbulent marriage. It lasted 31 years, but it was pretty turbulent. And they were separated my whole senior year. And it was really a challenging time. And I was surprised that that was the first thing that came to mind the other day when you asked me that question. Both because it became a challenge. Here I was, a student, as a high school senior, football player on the track team and so forth. And then, of course, how do I support my mother and my 4 sisters? And the thing that I think got me through that, and that's what I think the teaching point was, the church I went to, the senior pastor, Floyd Gardner Ellis, kind of was a mentor beforehand, but he really became a mentor that senior year. And so I think his friendship, his mentorship, his interest in me really got me through that year, because it was a pretty difficult year. My parents did get together at the end of my senior year, although they divorced several years later. But I think that was one of the biggest challenges, and that mentorship, the idea that Reverend Ellis came alongside and met the emotional need I really had. And so I think that was one of the tremendous points.
How about something in your career, an obstacle in your career where overcoming the challenge helped shape you, helped develop who you are right now?
Well, I think it was coming to grips that the mortality of my career was going to be earlier than I had hoped. One of the things you got to learn as an Army officer, or probably any military officer, every career has a life cycle. There's going to be an end at some point in time. The only question becomes how it ends. And so, I started off with all sorts of ambitions, and the career didn't go as far as the ambitions were going to go. And so when I realized, okay, I'm not going to go as far as I thought, that was disappointing, and very disappointing. And my wife, astutely, wisely, I mean, she's so precious to me, but she said, what you have to do is grieve over this. You had an ambition. It's like having a dream, and it's died. It's not going to happen, at least not the way you had ambitions. So you got to grieve over that. And that realization that I had to confront it, just like you lose a loved one. Well, I just lost, ambition. And having gotten that insight from my wife, I was able to look at, okay, where do we go from here? And so I thought, well, I still have a career left. I still have a free, 4 or 5 years. What else can I do? And because of that wise counsel and my idea of, okay, what's the last great thing I could do for the Army? And it struck me I could go teach. And that's why I'm asked to come to Leavenworth, Command General Staff College. Spent 4 magnificent years on the faculty, working with a lot of great students. So it was coming to grips with disappointment and realizing that, well, disappointment from an emotional intelligence point of view, disappointment says something is gone. It's never going to happen again. You cannot resurrect it. Now, move on, figure out. And I did. I figured out, okay, what's the next best thing I could do? And it brought me to Leavenworth, and kind of the rest is history. I've been here ever since.
Final thought then, Dr. Davis, a piece of advice for a young person or even a C-suite executive, but someone who's facing a challenge, an obstacle, a wall in their path. What is a piece of advice you can give someone, generic obviously, not specific to any situation, to help them over?
Well, so as a Christ follower, first of all, I say, put your trust in the Lord. Seek God's will in your life. I think that's the most important thing. Beyond that, I think, answer Simon Sinek's great question of the why. What is your why? absolutely be clear. What is the why of this organization? What's the why of my life? What's the why of what I'm called for? And I think you've got to realize that can change as you age and mature. My why today at 72 is not the same thing as when I was 22. So I've kind of been going through that recently. Okay, what is my why at 72? And I think it still is helping leaders and organizations succeed. But now I've added this idea of understanding wisdom. Having answered the why, I think you've got to be able to then understand what is my worldview? How do I see the pieces and parts fit together? What are the principles that are going to guide my decision making in all situations? Know them. Know your values. Know them clearly. Write them down. Think about them, because you don't want to try to discover them when you're in a crisis. You've got to have that moral courage. You've got to have those principles in place before you reach the crisis. So getting clarity. What's your why? What's your worldview with its guiding principles? That's one big thing I'd recommend to any leader at any stage in their life.
Well said. Dr. Ted Davis from Grace Strategic Services. We'll put your information in our show notes, and we appreciate you joining us today on Finding Your Frequency.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time right here on FYF and help you find your frequency.